Okay, we can get started. So, hello to those of you who don't know me already. My name is Stephanie Swilley. I am the creator behind Creative Nexus. I can't sit still. My background originally was in music performance. That's actually how we met. And I have in recent years moved over to visual arts. So that's kind of been the interest for me behind creating an interdisciplinary community of creatives. Today, our interview guest was so kind to come and interview in my living room because it's my husband. This is Daniel Swilley. My husband, like I said, he is a musician, a composer, educator, and it's been really transformative being able to kind of learn the creative process with visual arts while having him as a resource to talk to about the whole process and how to look at things, how to think about things. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to my wonderful husband and let him give us kind of an overview into just who he is professionally, creatively, kind of how he sees himself in this field.
Okay.
No pressure.
I guess for some background, I got into music because I like to play. And I actually started composing, I would think, rather late. I didn't start composing until I was in my undergrad already. I was doing a music education degree, and I had to do some compositions for a couple of classes and had way too much fun. And at the last minute had to I had to follow the rules so I wouldn't fail miserably. And then the next semester, I started taking composition lessons, which was fun and frustrating, but still fun and engaging in a way that spending a lot of hours in a practice room with my trumpet wasn't. And yeah, that was kind of the beginning of the end. I switched to composition the following year, and I didn't have to write that letter why I want to be a music educator anymore, which was kind of fun. I spent my undergrad kind of working on, I would imagine, are the standard challenges, doing things that are idiomatic for performers. And
that's how we really got to know each other. Was he said, "Can I listen to you practice?" And he sat in the practice room with me while I practiced and then asked questions.
Well, there were no bassoonists of note where I got my undergrad. So yeah, I had to learn about bassoon when I went to U at Georgia State. So when I started my master's, I pretty much started my first lessons with telling my teacher that I didn't like any of the music that I was writing, and that I had a sound in my head. And this is, we spent the next 3 years talking about it and trying to figure out what was that sound and who were the composers that had some of that sound. And my music changed completely, which was not only transformative for my output, but also in the way that I thought about music. And that's when I met you. And I want to say that even since then, I've still been figuring a lot of things out. My music went through a lot of changes in my master's, and then was sort of tempered when I was working on my doctorate. And I wrote a lot of hard music in my master's that was,
I remember,
tough to get played. And then sort of tempering working through a process, doing pre-compositional, doing a pre-compositional process, trying different compositional methodologies. And now I feel like I'm in a good place. And I think about, I still figure out new things every year. There are new things. It's like, well, I never thought of things this way. And then off I go into the next couple of projects with new information and new excitement. So I guess that's a little bit of background. In recent years, we have talked a lot about the creative process. And I would say that pedagogically, working with my students at University of Northern Iowa has been kind of another side to that coin. I guess it's not a coin. There are 3 legs because there's my own creative. It's a tripod. Are there
at
other
least.
are there other three-legged things? Some cats that have been stepped on. Anyway, so conversations with you on creative process, working with my students through their own creative process, and then my own experiments and how I'm thinking about things and what I change in project to project. So a lot of this, for years, I've found it engaging to read and learn about other artists' process, whether they're composers or visual artists. I haven't looked into choreographers. That would be something interesting to do next. But for example, I have a piece for my doctorate, an orchestral piece that was based off of painting techniques used by Dali. And that was kind of I've always liked Dali. Who doesn't like melty things? But learning that it wasn't just, melt things, it was, the juxtaposition of the kinds of things that he was putting in his works. I thought that was incredibly fascinating, and did an orchestral piece that did some of those same things. And I've done a number of pieces over the years where I've taken a methodology or an idea from another medium or maybe another artist, even in music, and what are the musical implications for me with that method or with that idea. And I would say that that's how I approach a lot of the projects that I do. Nowadays, I would say most projects, I find that I have an idea for the piece or the project first. I'm not one of those who works in the abstract and then names something afterwards. I have an idea at the beginning, the onset, and it's mainly because I use whatever the compositional idea is to give myself boundaries. I think a lot about like I've always hated writing, which is funny. I like scribbling notes. I don't like writing words. Although that's better in recent years. But historically, growing up, I hated writing. Even through college, I hated writing. And it was especially hard, and I'm sure everyone has this. But when you're asked to write something and you're not given a topic, it's like, oh, write about anything. Well, that's even harder. But if you have something to write about, and if you can if someone says, hey, write about boots and write about purple boots and what you could do with purple boots, who knows what you can come up with when you like. There's a pair of boots and there's something purple. Well, these are the things you smash together. But the same thing with works for me with composition. When I have an idea for a piece, I use the idea and try to, as much as possible, mine compositional decisions from that idea, because I find that I work better with constraints. If I have a box, a path, or even if it's one that's challenging, it's something that I can work with, and it's a bit of a puzzle, and I find that I like a puzzle. If I don't have those things in place, I really feel like, any decisions, well, there's a lot of arbitrary to most of my decisions. So I'm quick to second guess, well, was that the thing to do? I don't know, let's do this thing. So if I even can tangentially, relate them to the idea, then at least they have some merit. Whether that's still pretty thin as well, this is the game I play with myself. So that is kind of where I am in recent times. I think my music is a little easier to play than it used to be, at least. But nowadays, I think I have a better sense of what I want. I'm no longer feeling like I did when I met you. That I hit on my music.
He did not know what he wanted when he met me. I told him.
I like the music I'm producing now, and that's a good feeling. Although I still feel, there are plenty of things to explore, so it's exciting.
Do you like all the music that you produce?
Oh no, but there are always moments I'm like, oh, I could have done that better. I could have done this better. I really like this. But at a certain point, there are deadlines, and you do what you can. It's like, is this an acceptable way to get from A to B? Yeah, that works. Moving on. And I find projects are lessons. There's always a reflective process at the end, or when it's approaching the end. Okay, where could this have sucked less? There's a little bit there, a little bit there. Okay, well, I'll try to, what can I take from this to do better in the next piece? And I mean, there are those that hit pause and rework and redo and revise. I do a little, but I don't want to get, it's a loop, it's a trap. So I try not to, I try to artfully step around it.
You can still be creating, or you can still be learning and growing through creating and be more prolific in your output, instead of sitting there going, I wrote this one piece. It took me 20 years of tweaking it.
It's really good. Or, you know, how many pieces could you write in 20 years? And
they would all have really good moments.
Yeah. And you know, anyone that you'd read about in the history books, objectively speaking, every note in their music is not every note is gold. It's like, oh, well, this isn't the cool bit, that's the cool bit, but this is where you're sort of resting before you, yes, and we're getting to the cool bit. So I think it's like that for all artists. I think that's reasonable.
Yeah. So you know, hearing you talk about this, obviously I've been privy to this whole process for the last 17 years.
It's been a little bit.
For the last long time. I don't know. I can't do the math. I quit. 2007 to now. However long that's been. 16 years. So anyway, I've been privy to this growth, this process. I've seen you working with things like paranoid critical process of Dali's, you know, creating that your paranoid critical variations.
Yes. Incidentally, I picked that because it's fun to say.
Yeah.
You have to slow down, otherwise you fall.
And so
no one's talking to you, cat.
Sorry, our cat is chiming in. But I've seen you work through that. Recently, you've been working on this organ piece that is working with some beatnik poetry, which was a learning process for me. So can you talk a little bit more about kind of how you take these other art forms or art practices and how you translate them to your music composition process?
You can come sit with us, or you cannot, but you don't need to comment. The art is interpretive, at least in my mind, in all ways. And basically, I'm just looking for things that resonate with me. For the recent piece that you're talking about, a colleague who plays organ is doing an album, and he says, or a concert and an album, and he has this thematic thread of the beat and beatnik writings. So I looked over a lot of stuff, and you know, Burroughs, Kerouac, a number of authors that, and a number of the works, whether it was prose or whether, you know, just more philosophical stuff. I tried to immerse myself in all of it. Don't make a face. And I was basically looking for things that resonate. What are some ideas that are nothing that was too specific that gave me. I was looking for things that were open to interpretation, I guess. Things that I liked the sort of the feel of, but didn't lean particularly toward one type of execution. And in that sort of gray area, I thought those are kinds of places where I like to play. And for this one, I went with, there's a book of blueses by Jack Kerouac, and he has a number of them in there, and you can find recordings online where he performs a number of these. There would be a small, like a quartet or something playing with him, just a rhythm section, and he's, you know, reciting his poetry, some of it very rhythmical, some of it very kind of loose and conversational, and some of them, there is a rhythm to Kerouac's, I would say especially to this book of blueses, but to Kerouac's writing in general. And that was something that I was sort of leaning into, trying to find something that I liked the feel of. So it really was a feel. And after identifying some things that I liked, it was a matter of then, thinking about how I can work with those materials. I made a point of not listening to any of the recordings of the blues that I picked. I picked McDowell Street, and I listened to some of the others. Once I kind of said, "Oh, I like this one. What are some of the other things that happened, or some of his interpretation of some of the others?" Just so I could get kind of the feel to know this might be something that's compared against. But I didn't want to listen to the one that I chose because I didn't want that. I didn't want that strongly an influence. But basically, I kind of did an analysis of the poem, and I looked for the things, again, just looking for the things that resonate with me. For this particular one, I found kind of my organ piece inspired by this, and I use the word inspired because I think inspired is a great word, because I can kind of pick from the source whatever I want. I don't have to feel like, oh, this is about this. You've given me grief over this for years, that my program notes never say anything of relevance, and I think it's because of conversations with other artists, and I'll say, oh, this is about this, and I play them something, and they're like, I don't hear that, and I'm like,
It doesn't matter.
yeah, that it's not about you. But so inspiration is I think a wonderful word in this context. So I picked, this my piece is a 7 movement thing, and basically I just kind of have 7 ideas that I've pulled out, and some of them are related, and I kind of build ideas. My piece is going to be kind of a weaving through these 7 ideas with these threads that sort of hop between some of the movements. And for each of those ideas, I pulled out particular words and phrases and concepts, and sort of had different scenes in mind for like musical sort of feel for each movement or section that I wanted to portray. And really, I used the text from those poems that I pulled out as to make a lot of the compositional decisions. For example, the word McDowell Street. If you do so, there's a thing I do called sonification, where basically I'm turning any sort of numbers or things that are non-musical into musical values. So I'm turning non-pitches and rhythms into pitches and rhythms and dynamics and orchestration and tessitura and all these things. So I took a lot of the text, and if A is 1 and B is 2, and if you do that all the way to Z, you'll get numbers, and you get many numbers for all his writings. So the numbers for McDowell Street, I basically took those numbers and worked with them, massaged them. If I want them to be pitches within an octave, I do some math. It's not scary math, just a modulo operation. But basically, if it's a number over 12, I subtract 12, and there you go. Now and if it goes over 12 again, I subtract 12 again, and that's not really how modulo works, but it makes the head hurt less when you think about it. And doing similar things for rhythms, and some parameters I allow to be intuitive, and some parameters I take directly from the words that I pull out. And then there were times when I put my own words in. Here's some descriptors of the kind of feel I want. So I did those words as well. And so basically I end up with a pool of information, a pool of a resource that I can pull compositional decisions from, whether that's structure or the ideas. I usually have some elements that I have some elements that are derived from the idea, and then some elements that I take that I control intuitively, so that I have some wiggle to make it so that the ideas appeal, so that the values I get can be presented in an appealing way. That's largely the way the piece has unfolded. There's been a bit of a learning curve learning how to write for organ, this is my first time doing that, and it's a lot more involved than writing for other keyboard instruments. Thankfully, organists are used to people who aren't aren't organists writing for them, and they go, oh, just tell me tell me the general feels that this is supposed to have, and I'll make it so. And the colleague that I'm collaborating with is very much a wizard in that sense. He does very well in that sort of space for creativity in the performing end of the piece.
So I'm thinking about your process and how I love the idea of it just being inspiration, and that, we're looking at somebody else's process, somebody else's work, and we're taking what works for us and you leave the rest. Like, you don't have to say, I am going to make this exact creative process now work in this other medium, because that's bananas. Like, it's not going to happen. Not without really making yourself frustrated, I'm sure. But so when we think about that, and, taking what works and working within those parameters, do you feel like the result of having those parameters, especially because a lot of times you give yourself pretty narrow parameters on things, do you feel like that forces your creativity, pushes you into a new place where, like, you no longer just have the obvious, but now you're having to go beyond the obvious and really dig up new ways of doing things?
It's just that. Back to Purple Boots. I don't know what I could come up with writing. If you said, give me 2,000 words on Purple Boots, I have no idea where that will go. But now I'm thinking about what the possibilities could be.
Your next piece is going to be called Purple Boots.
There are worse things that pieces could be about. So I think it's just that the ideas that I pull from a methodology or another art, or some of this, you take any stream of numbers and turn it into music, or turn it into musical values. That gives you an aspect of what to work with. Like, if I gave you, it would be the same if I said you can only use these brushes or these colors or whatever. Then you need to do XYZ within those parameters. I think this is a way to give yourself a focus. It's a good way to generate material. It's a good way to stretch in a lot of ways. I think there are aspects of this, I think, in most, like, pedagogically, and for most artists, like for visual arts, for music. Yeah, and I think it's crucial.
It's kind of the necessity is the motherhood of creativity. Not the motherhood. Necessity is the mother of creativity. Where when you have this limit and you're trying to create something specific, like, okay, I have this limit of, I'm working with tam-tams, but now I need to create something that's really ethereal and soft. Like, then it's, how do I make that work? What kind of different techniques, how can I explore this to get to the result that is not the obvious result? Because that is not the obvious for tam-tams. Everybody's just like, oh, what a soft bit of lovely. There are angels floating in the clouds. Nobody thinks that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's interesting. And it does really, I mean, that's how you end up with new techniques and new approaches to things. So to turn a little bit, I'm thinking about your collaboration with, like, Sandra, or any of, like, conversations with me or other artists from other disciplines. What has that been like for you? Because my biggest experience is, talking to you, and I already have a background in music, so it's a very easy translation for me in a lot of ways. But what's it like for you when you've worked with artists from other disciplines?
Largely speaking, every collaboration has been different. And for the most part, we've established, so the collaboration with Sandra, this has been some years.
I want to give them context.
Sandra is a dancer choreographer that I worked with on a piece. I was composing a piece for electronic music that I wanted to have dance accompaniment with, and the idea was I wanted to do something creepy, which it's fun. So she delivered. So basically, I wanted to do something. The premise was that you're sort of locked in a dream. You're trapped in a dream. Work with some phobias. And I wanted it to be very organic. This piece was done all with electronic music. I did it in 8 channels, and I used with electronic music. You can use pre-existing sound sources, or you can synthesize your sound. Generally speaking, a good way to make organic sounds is to start with something organic. It's very easy to hear, for example, like when you process the human voice, it's kind of hard to disguise that, oh yeah, that sounds like it came from the voice at some point. You might be several iterations of processing later, but it's still, once you've listened a little bit and start playing around with these things, it's pretty obvious. So I used all recordings of animals. So there's some badger hissing and growling. There was a camel in there. I did not find any of these animals in the studio. I used a BBC sound library, or maybe it wasn't BBC, but I used a sound effects library that had recordings of all these animals, and then I processed them and made some sufficiently creepy sounding stuff.
The cats were not.
The cats were completely freaked out. It was wonderful. Anywho, the conversation basically went that we talked. I said I'd love to do this. She was game, and we talked about kind of the different, some structural things in terms of how the piece was going to flow. But for the most part, Sandra is an improviser, and I knew she was going to be, she was just wanted to get a sense for the vibe, and then she would do her thing. And it was largely, are you game? And this is the kind of project it is. As much as I can, full disclosure on this is what I'm thinking to do, and it'll be about this long, and this is the scope. And for the most part, there was a conversation. Okay, well, I'm thinking I can do this with it while you're doing that, and a lot of, this will be my contribution, this will be yours. And for the most part, once that was set up, we didn't really have, it wasn't like working with an animator. I didn't need to set frames, although had she done a more fixed choreographed thing, maybe discussing, okay, at these time points, then these things will happen. But for that project, we didn't have any of those things in place. It was much looser and kind of just freeing in that case.
Feel it as you go.
We could each do kind of our own work. And the way the project worked, I needed to be mostly finished with mine before she could do hers. So I remember sending her some drafts that were a little rough, and she knew the general vibe from there, and I think that's kind of it. So the collaborations that I've had with others, and I would say the other collaborations that I've had have all been with musicians, and some have given a lot of parameters. And they've been requests. Oh, can you do a piece that does these things, that uses these instruments? Percussionists that own cymbal collections and gong collections come to mind for this. Oh, I need a piece that allows me to use all of these gongs,
so I can write them off of my taxes.
Yeah, so these are the things you end up doing. So I would say for each of those, there was kind of a discussion of, what do you want to get out of the project? What are the things that you need, like for this organ collaboration? I really have had my own. I've been on my own in terms of what I do in the piece. The idea was just there's a theme that he's trying to do, a thread that he wants to follow through the program, through this album. And he in preparation, he showed me a number of the other pieces. These are pieces I'm thinking that something that could nicely fit in this spot in the program. So in that way, there was more information. but that and anything up to 12 minutes or so, or even longer. And that, that was the premise. Another collaboration that I'm talking about now, basically I was told, anything I want, just do it with electronics. So something for oboe and electronics, make it fun. Actually, she didn't even say that. So
make it so.
Make it happen. It doesn't have to be fun. At least that's my interpretation.
Make it so.
Yeah. And some of that was logistics. If I did something accompanied with piano, or if I did something that was live processed, then she has to bring a pianist, or she has to bring a bunch of gear. And this is, there were some logistics just in being able to take the piece on the road. So, yeah, but they all have that sort of, this is the scope, this is how I want to contribute, this is what I need from the collaboration.
So communicating that vision and then kind of working together on what that vision looks like to each of you, and make sure that you're on the same page. For the
organ piece, we didn't really talk about we talked about a timetable when the piece would happen, when the recording would happen, and the album would happen. But we didn't really talk about a time frame in terms of how we work. But since the organ is so new to me, I have been sending chunks along the way, and it's like, okay, have I done something incredibly unidiomatic?
Can you play all of this?
Yes. Did I do the silly? I did not. Okay. And it's been also progressively, it's allowed me to ask the questions like, okay, well, how would you interpret this? And we've been talking about interpretation along the way. So that I could see being the same kind of process that I could have had with Sandra had she been doing a more choreographed and more, a more defined thing rather than relying on improvisation as much. So
to expand on that, I'm thinking about just your creative process in general. Like when you're looking at something, I know you touched on it some, especially talking about the organ piece, but just, what does your creative process look like? You go from inspiration, idea, and then do you go through a planning process? How do you get yourself from big idea to functional next steps? You ignore the phone call.
You ignore the phone call. I will hit the stop making noise button. So it changes. I have a fear might be a strong word to use, but I maybe put it as I have a desire to stay flexible and continue to evaluate. Like my process, even when I have a piece that I think works well, and I kind of know how how the composition process works, I don't necessarily approach the next piece in the same way. If I might write a couple pieces with a similar process, and then, okay, let me do something completely different. And I think I do this as a way to keep excitement and change, and I learn
stagnation.
Keep stagnation out, but also I find that I learn and I come back to things that maybe didn't work as well, but I have a different perspective now, after that piece or after several pieces in between. It varies a lot. That doesn't help. I'm sorry. But as I said, a piece will often come from an idea, and that might be I might have the collaboration first, but then I need to chase down an idea that goes with that collaboration, whether that's another piece of art, which I am fond of. I do that a lot, or a text, or in recent years, I've worked with artist prompts just to generate short pieces, and then those turn into departure points for larger pieces.
Do you go to these, I'm going to call them references, like art or text or whatever? Do you go to those from your idea to give you the limits that you give yourself, like to use those as your box kind of?
I have, like, I've had some pieces where I've had an idea for a piece, and then I've looked up, are there any poems or visual arts on this? And the poems may have given me some words that I could crunch numbers from, and the art I've taken, the mountains in the back of this Dali painting, I'll make this clarinet line kind of do something like that. I've used things those way, to give me some elements, and then I'm like, okay, those are some bones. Let me elaborate from there. And some of it has, and some of it I use randomness for. I feel a little less. I used to like the randomness more, but I think in recent times, I'm liking the randomness is lacking the connection. If I randomly generate a bunch of words or a bunch of values, then it seems they're less meaningful to each other. Whereas if I find some thread that connects them in a meaningful way, then I find that I can work with that better.
More cohesion.
I think so. So that varies a lot. And that can give me a lot of the materials that I work with. But ultimately, I get to, you get to a point where you're working on kind of like the musical surface, or the idea, or the actual, you're actually working at the score, and these are the directions, what I want this player to do or whatever. Oftentimes for that, I'm thinking about the shape and the sound, and I'm singing it, or I'm oftentimes conducting. Oh, it's going to be shaped like this. So maybe there would be some connection with choreography there. But it has this shape. Now, what rhythm or what pitch or what harmony or what other things can allow me to have this sort of thing happen. Music is a little weird in compared to other art forms, perhaps, in that as the composer, I'm not actually the one doing the arting, or I am, but
you're creating, but you're not putting it out there.
I'm the one with the ego to give directions to other
right.
people to go out on stage and do the arting. So it's a little different. I need to give the directions for the intent of the piece in a way that's hopefully performable.
Clear.
Weird. So there's so a lot of that I'm thinking about the shape and the sounds that are there. And this, honestly, I got a lot from thinking about from working with electronic music. And you can control everything in electronic music. But at the end of the day, one sound compared to the next really doesn't matter. What is the shape? What is the, you have the shape, you have the effect that is achieved by a given sound, and what goes into it, the timbre, the activity, whatever it is. Well, that's mutable. You can switch those out. You can just rearrange. You can do the same thing with acoustic music. I give a flute player this, give a bassoon player this. Well, it might be a little different on the surface level, but the effect is largely the same. So in recent years, I have thought of these all as one thing. Thinking about shape and effect.
So with you being the ideas and not the execution, as the composer, you are the ideas. It is up to the performer to do the execution.
At least for acoustic music.
Yes. And that's definitely where I was thinking about it, because that was what you were talking about. Whereas, like you mentioned, with the other arts, you are both ideas and execution. If you're a visual artist, you come up with your idea, plus you have to make it so. You have to create it. Something that I know happens a lot, definitely in visual arts, probably in other non-time constrained arts, would be where your ability for execution does not meet your ability for ideas, where you have an idea and you're like, how? But I don't have the skills, I don't have the space, I don't have the I can't afford the materials, I don't have the know-how. How would you, I would imagine this is something that you might come across, like, especially if you have um, a commissioned piece by a specific instrumentalist, and you're like, oh, I have this idea, but they can't do that. Like, this instrument is not capable of doing this. The bassoon is not going to be able to do double stops and just continuous, like, it's
If you set it on fire. No.
but so how do you,
I'm not sure I understand.
how do you then approach that? Or what would you say to a student maybe who is running into their ability to execute on creating the directions for their ideas? How do you approach that disconnect?
I think some pieces need things that are, some pieces need more than some ideas need more in your performing forces than others, at least from thinking from a music composition standpoint. I think there are plenty of pieces that I could do with a solo flute, and then there are some that I would need far more. I might need a quartet, a quintet, a larger ensemble of some combination, or maybe I would need electronic music to have, to get the sounds or to get whatever quality. And when I'm working with students, I try to get them to do more pre-compositional thinking about the idea before they start working on the piece. Oh, I have this list of ideas. I have a really good idea for a piece. My next piece is going to be this. And then they get a saxophonist, they ask them to do a piece of a certain flavor, and I'm like, I'm going to make it work. I have had several ideas that I think are really good composition, that I think were really good compositional ideas, and then I'm going to make it work, and I didn't really make it work. And maybe and maybe I could make it work now, but at the time I think I was, as a student when I tried that, I think definitely there were some that were just too big. And at this point, I would say that there are some hurdles you can't climb, you can't pass. So you kind of have to think about the idea and how it scales. I think some are more forgiving than others. If you're going to make, you can make a tiny Eiffel Tower, but some of the tiny, but yeah, some of the effect is lost. Does the idea still come across? Maybe. So I think it really is dependent on context. Yeah, I don't have specifics.
So you think potentially you could reimagine it to work within the parameters that you are existing within, but potentially you need to just put that down in your idea notebook to come back to another time when the parameters are there. I think
at least for the first execution, I think is a good idea. Now, there are plenty of examples. I had a student a couple years ago who had an old piano piece, and someone asked him if he would do an orchestral work for a younger ensemble. And he's like, oh, I'll take this piano piece and make it and do an orchestra piece. And when he did that, he actually found that some of the things that he tried exploring, a bunch of rolls in the piano, he approached it differently in the ensemble, and actually got to take advantage of some things in the ensemble. And he's like, oh, well, I could do this a little bit more, and the piece ended up being longer and more involved. And then it's funny, he's gotten a lot of mileage out of this piece. He was then asked to, he actually then went through kind of a revision process and changed his original piano piece. He's like, oh, I like it much better now. And then the following year, or maybe 2 years later, I don't know if he got the ask or if he just did it because he was encouraged by the first time. He actually made a wind ensemble version of the piece. And again, went through kind of a process of, I can take advantage of the ensemble in these ways. And each of these iterations, it's kind of, some of the ideas are there, but it's really become kind of a different piece. So really, I don't, there's an idea of, sort of, are you rewriting the same piece, or like at what point is a new piece? I think it was really a new piece with some of the same ideas, but
Variations.
maybe, but I think some of that is involved. I mean, there are some ideas that are general. You just get a lot of mileage out of them. Um, an opera for speaking violinist or singing violinist might be it would be interesting. It's kind of like you can include purple boots in this, and it could be a hoot. Need a banjo too. Anyway, so something else that makes me an interaction with a student that I think is related not to your last ask, but to the previous one, making note of composers and their contributions, and then their reliance on performers to take it the rest of the way. In working with a student recently, I was highlighting this, but I was highlighting it when he was working on an electronic piece. And the piece, it was a piece in progress, and there were aspects, big chunks of sounds were put into place, but there's very much a roughness about, they were just sort of, oh, placeholder, this thing here, this thing here. And in the same way, and when I heard what he had in progress, I immediately thought about a first rehearsal in an ensemble. How the players don't know yet what parts lead into the other parts. It's the conductor's responsibility. They're the one with the full score to say, okay, flutes, you're passing that off to these people. You're doing this here. You really need to get out of the way so these things can happen. That's what happens in rehearsal. This was like the electronic version of that first rehearsal before any of that had happened, and it was actually an opportunity for a lot of good conversation on what happens in rehearsal and how electronic composition is different from acoustic composition, in that when you're doing an electronic piece, you're not doing a score, you're working on the final product, in the same way that a visual artist is. This is the thing. When you're done, it's done. So we get to talk about how, what you've got in place so far. This was like working on your score. You've roughed out the directions. These are the main things, but now you need to refine and, okay, make it so that this leads into that, if it's supposed to, or how do you make these things sound like they're happening in the same room and not just that first rehearsal sort of chaos? So in a way, it would be like, oh, let's turn these first-time improvisers into seasoned improvisers, or or work through let's make it sound like there's been a few rehearsals.
So then, to connect that to acoustic writing, when you're writing an acoustic piece, do you go through that same refinement at the end, or do you leave that to your conductor to make those decisions and determine that? And what is the level?
That is very much a personal, there's a line in the sand for everybody on how much direction they give. I'm of the opinion that on more direction is better than less. There is no performance practice for my music. Like,
don't know what you're talking about.
Well, people know how to play, the old dead guys. In fact, the notations we have in scores, as you know, they weren't put there by the composers. Right. They're put there by editors or people who played. It's like, oh yeah, you need to do these things to really make it work. And people know how to perform those pieces. People don't know how to play my stuff, and I can't be there for every performance to guide them through. So I need to do that editorial process and tell them how to take just these notes and rhythms and shape them into music. And doing the same thing for larger ensemble pieces, like, so that the conductor would know, oh, well, these are scored softer than these. These must need to get out of the way so that these things can be heard. Yeah, I think you have to have that information in there. So that's
So you don't just, because if those old dead guys didn't put it in there to start with, then somebody determined that standard practice for it. So Do you think this is you don't trust them to determine, the right way to do it? You're just making it easier because it's hard enough to get your ship played? Or is it an ownership?
I think it's a little bit of all those things.
Another tripod.
Maybe another tripod. So we have two cats. We had two cats. Anyway, so I think I know how I want things to sound. So there's no way it's going to happen if I don't tell them how to. So that's in my mind. The old dead guys, I think, at least at the beginning, a lot of them would be there for those rehearsals, and they would have been the shapers of those performances. So they were involved, and it's not that I'm not involved with a lot of my first performances, but the idea is
you're also not on retainer by a king or something to
that
just sit around and be there.
Yeah, no, not so much. I need a prince to sponsor music for the court. That would be nice. So I think there's some of that. Also, the idea is hopefully music, at least for contemporary composers, ideally your score should be bulletproof so that you don't have to be there for it. It should be a clear document to the intent of the piece and shouldn't have any ambiguity to it. Or at least that is what I strive for and what I berate my students to try to achieve in their pieces. So
interesting. I never really considered that level of refinement on the connection until you were talking about doing it with the electroacoustic music, the electronic music. Because the way you were talking about it very much made me think about like blocking in, visual art, drawing your envelopes and then refining the shapes and stuff from there. And then once you're getting into shading and colors, like, okay, well, if I make this part darker, that looks lighter, and how it's all, color theory, how it's all going to interplay. So you're dealing with also psychoacoustics, where we're dealing with what do you call those things? Those things where you trick your eyeballs.
I can't see colors, so my eyeballs trick all of it.
Shoot, like it's the dress.
Thing.
No, not holograms. It's like I looked at this thing. Is this circle bigger or is that circle bigger? Because they're in relation to other things. And is this darker?
Perspective?
I can't think of the word. But
so yes, as far as I can tell, I think this is very similar. I mean, we're balancing timbres, you're balancing colors and shading. It's so with electronic composition opposed to acoustic, I'm listening to the result in the same way that you're looking at the final. And we're working on the finished sensory experience. So you're evaluating and okay, it needs these things, and we're doing the same thing in electronic music, but we're using equalizers and filters and different envelopes to shape things.
So I know you said that you kind of beat the score markings and stuff into your students, but do you go through that same refinement process at the end of an acoustic piece also, like sitting there and listening to it? Because all you'd be able to do is like tweak at your finale playback and stuff. Like, so how do you handle that?
So there should be a revision process after performance. Ideally, if you can hear readings of the piece, like as you're getting close, if you can hear rehearsals as it's being put together, and you can go, okay, I should make these changes so that when you hear something perform, you're like, okay, if you guys, you're marked here, you're marked to do this here, let's tweak that a little bit. Make that short, make this long. Slur those things. That is that's stuff that's hard to do when you're just listening to the MIDI playback, which is lovely. Yeah. But when you get in the group and you can ask questions too, it's like, okay, well, you guys are marked this. You guys are forte. You guys are mezzo forte, and these things here. were you really playing what you think? Let's do it again, and
Right.
really read the directions. Follow step one, and then do it again. It's like, nah, you guys need to be softer. You guys need to be louder. And then there's a feedback loop there for refining those directions in the score. And so it's kind of like those same shadings, and
Except you're at the disadvantage of having to rely on somebody else for the finished product to be referring to.
Yep. And it's all subjective. Yeah, that sounded loud to me. Well, where were you sitting in the hall?
Yeah. So how do you steer your students to deal with that? Or do you just say, once you've written the piece, you do kind of have to wash your hands of it because you only have so much control over what's going on?
There is a little bit of that. Realize all you can do, your job, your part of the composition is done.
I remember you always being so calm for your recitals, and it made me so jealous because your part was done. Yeah. It was just, I was more nervous playing in your recital than you were.
Yeah, any sort of evaluation. Okay, yeah, if the piece, there's a different sound that, oh, that was a bad performance. Oh, that is a bad piece. And I think you can hear which one is failing.
I know if the performance is bad enough, I don't think you're going to know.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. The performances have to be at a certain level so that okay, there wasn't enough of the piece there to know if it was bad or not. That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, largely the work is already done. So the same thing with juries. Performance majors would be freaking out. Oh, I got to go play all my stuff. Well, we've already done the work. Did I find a printer that works? Right. Yes. Okay, the score is clean. It's ready to go.
Right.
Did I do okay this semester?
Yeah. Yes. For sure. Yeah, I'm often jealous of that. But now, there's also the once the work is done, it's done. I do appreciate not being a performer anymore. However, I don't have any oh no, it was just a bad piece. It's not my fault. It turned out bad because I was the idea and the execution. If there's something you don't like, that's on me.
I get some of that with electronic music as well, but
you can blame it on the sound system.
Yes, yes. Sometimes, those speakers really just, they weren't set up well. The hall, the
EQ was bad. Somebody busted the board.
The space is a little, the space is not ideal for this. And maybe you can do the same thing with lighting. And this room is awfully.
It's hung too high. The angle's wrong.
Yeah, someone turned the lights on in here, and I don't appreciate that. So,
well, I want to. We have been at it for an hour. It always goes fast, or at least to me, it feels fast. I want to thank you so much for being a good husband and not running away when I say, "Hey, I'm going to make you be my first interview person."
One does one's best.
Yes, you do a wonderful job. But yes, I want to thank all of you for joining us. And if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to leave a comment. Be happy to connect you with Daniel. He is in Creative Nexus. I was thinking about Mighty Networks at the same time. He is in there, so you can also connect with him.
Creative Nexus.
Yeah, don't confuse me. So you can connect with him anytime if you have any other questions to talk about process. Especially pedagogical insight that has been really beneficial to me when I'm going, I don't know what to do. I have a big idea and I can't make it so. He treats me like one of his students and he helps me break it down into bite size, the next step to get things going. But yes, so thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful day. We love you very much. They're multiplying. Oh,
I'll start telling you that.
she loves spiders on the head. Cracking it. It's you.